My name is Michelle. I'm 48 years old and live in a quiet town nestled in the Bay Area of Northern California. John and I had been married for 15 years. Our relationship had always been steady. We never had children, not for lack of trying but because early on, doctors told me my body wasn't built for pregnancy. We talked about adoption, considered IVF, even had a few consultations, but eventually all those plans just faded away. John never blamed me. On the contrary, he always said, "You're already the luckiest thing that ever happened to me." His business was doing well. He owned one of the local home renovation firms in town. It wasn't huge, but it was solid. Many of his managers had worked with him for over a decade. Life settled into a rhythm, and I truly believed we would grow old together just like that. Then, 3 months ago, everything came to a halt. He came home from the hospital one afternoon looking pale, distant. I took the medical report from his hands, and when I saw the words late-stage liver cancer, it felt like someone had dropped me into a block of ice. "We'll go to San Francisco, see a specialist," I said, forcing my voice to stay calm. "I'll book us in at Mayo Clinic. I'll handle everything." But he shook his head. His tone was heartbreakingly gentle. "Michelle, I know my body. I'd rather spend what time I have left with you, not in hospitals." I couldn't change his mind. He chose to stay nearby and pursue comfort care, saying all he wanted was to spend his remaining time by my side. So I threw myself into the logistics: hospital arrangements, medication schedules, home nursing. I organized it all, down to the last detail. I just wanted him to have peace. One evening he was sitting on the edge of the bed and asked me to come over. He said there was something he needed to tell me. Something I can't leave unsaid. My chest tightened. He didn't look at me. He stared at the crease in the bedsheet and spoke quietly. "There's a girl. Her name is Sophie. She's pregnant." I didn't register what he meant. "What?" He inhaled sharply like he'd been holding this in for months. "She says the baby is mine." I stood there frozen. It took a few seconds to sink in. I don't think I cried. My throat just closed up. "What are you saying?" My voice was dry. "You cheated on me?" He finally looked up, his eyes rimmed with red. "I don't want to lie to you, Michelle. Back then you were busy taking care of your mom, you were barely home. I was lost." Sophie was new, young, eager. She was the new assistant at the company. One thing led to another, and I've regretted it ever since. I stared at him, trying to detect any trace of sarcasm, any sign this was some sick joke. But there was nothing, just a tired face and a gaze that didn't flinch. "I already gave her some money," he said. "She promised not to bother us. I just wanted to clean things up before I go. I didn't want you to deal with drama after I'm gone." I didn't say a word. I just sat down, my mind blank. A few minutes later he reached into his nightstand and pulled out a small key, placing it in my hand. "This is for the safe," he said. "There are a few things in there. You don't need them now, but someday if you feel ready, open it." "What's inside?" He hesitated, swallowed. "Some explanations. If I'm not around anymore, they'll help you understand the choices I made." He never mentioned Sophie again. Never said another word about the baby. His health declined rapidly after that, and we never spoke of it again. On the night he died, it was raining outside. I sat in the corner of the hospital room and watched him close his eyes for the last time. The monitor beside him fell silent. The doctor said he passed peacefully. I didn't say anything. I just looked down and clutched the key in my hand. 3 days later was the funeral. The weather was eerily similar, gray, damp, cold to the bone. I sat in the front row, barely looking up. Toward the end of the service, as the crowd began to thin, I noticed someone standing nearby. A young woman in a black dress, face pale, a slight swell beneath her waistline. Her expression wasn't one of grief. It was restrained, almost expectant. I didn't need to ask. I knew immediately. This was Sophie. I was just about to speak when Loretta, my mother-in-law, stepped out from behind me and walked over to her. She took Sophie's arm, gently linking them. "Don't just stand there," she said. "You're carrying John's child. You shouldn't be on your feet so long." I froze. Loretta turned to me. "Michelle, this girl is carrying John's baby. She needs us. We can't let her go through this alone." Before I could respond, Loretta had already led Sophie away, as if she had just explained something as ordinary as the weather. And in that moment I realized, this was just the beginning. Sophie moved in without so much as a heads up. My mother-in-law, Loretta, had clearly assumed it was all settled. The guest room had been made up, fresh linens laid out, even a new toothbrush and tube of toothpaste waiting neatly by the bathroom sink. I stood at the edge of the kitchen doorway, watching Sophie walk slowly through the living room, one hand resting on her pregnant belly as she took in the space. "This place feels so cozy," she murmured, like she belonged here, like this was already her home. I swallowed the rising heat in my throat. "You sure she's only staying temporarily?" I asked Loretta under my breath. She paused as she arranged a platter of cut fruit on the dining table. "Michelle, she's carrying my son's child. Don't you think that makes her part of this family too?" I let out a short dry laugh. No answer. Loretta continued, her voice laced with gentle insistence. "John's gone, but he left behind a child. A part of him. You two never had kids. At least now the Walker name has a chance to continue. Don't dwell on what happened between her and John." I turned my face away. I didn't want her to see what was in my eyes. At dinner they chatted about baby names, casually setting an extra plate across from me. I almost said it was John's seat. But I kept silent. "I was thinking," Sophie said sweetly, spooning soup into her mouth. "If it's a boy, maybe we name him John Jr.? Or maybe something modern, like Brown. I glanced at her, unreadable. She didn't look like someone mourning a lost lover. Not even a trace of fatigue lined her makeup. Her smile always carried a pinch of carefully measured humility. Just enough to look considerate, just enough to grate on my nerves. Loretta beamed. "Whatever we name him, if he's a Walker, I'll love him. Don't you think it's a bit soon to be naming anyone?" I said finally, calm and even. Sophie lowered her spoon and smiled gently at me, her voice feather light. "Oh, I just like being prepared. I mean, you and John never had children. Maybe it's hard for you to understand what this feels like." There was a quiet pity in her tone, subtle, calculated. The kind that slips in under your skin and festers. My fingers tightened around my fork until my knuckles turned white. After dinner, I heard her upstairs, moving around in what used to be John's study. "Just curious what his workspace looked like," she said when she caught me watching her, voice deliberately casual. Days later, my favorite coffee mug went missing. It was the one John gave me for our anniversary, printed with the name of the town where we'd taken our first trip. I looked all over the kitchen. It was nowhere to be found. Until one morning I saw her on the garden patio sipping orange juice from that very mug. He caught me watching. "Is this yours?" she asked, all smiles. I found it up in the cabinet and figured no one was using it. I didn't speak. Just nodded once. But I knew then, it wasn't a mistake. It was a message. She began appearing more and more. Hovering near the kitchen, lounging in the living room, even drifting around my dressing area. One afternoon I came home from the store to find her by my bedroom door, rummaging through the small table by the wall. When she saw me, she quickly smiled and held up a bottle of pills. "Oh, I was just looking for some Tylenol. My back's been acting up." Loretta never stopped her. On the contrary, she'd use that suffocating tone to say things like, "Michelle, you have to understand, she's pregnant. Her body's under strain, her emotions are all over the place." That's when I started realizing, this wasn't my home anymore. One night, I stood at the top of the stairs and listened to their voices drifting up from the living room. Sophie's and Loretta's, hushed but clear. "I know Michelle probably finds it hard to accept me right now," Sophie said, her voice full of feigned sincerity. "But I'm willing to take it slow. I just want this baby to have a real home." Loretta sighed. "She's just stubborn. Don't let it get to you." I stood there like a stranger. Like someone eavesdropping in her own house. The next morning, Sophie made breakfast. Whole wheat toast, scrambled eggs, blueberry yogurt. She placed the plate in front of me with a bright smile. "John told me you liked this." I looked at her, then at the plate. "He did," I said. "But not everything he liked about me can be replicated." He hesitated, smile faltering. "I was just trying to help. I mean, we're family now, right?" I set down my napkin and left the room. As I closed the door behind me, I heard her sigh softly, like I had somehow disappointed her, like her kindness had gone to waste. That night, I opened my nightstand drawer and stared at the small key John had given me before he died. I couldn't keep waiting. This house was being taken inch by inch, and I had to take it back. I couldn't sleep that night. The house was unnervingly still. Only the soft rustling of the old trees outside and the occasional hum of the refrigerator broke the silence. I lay curled under the covers, staring at the ceiling, unmoving. But Sophie's words echoed endlessly in my head. We're family now, don't take it so personally. I don't remember when I got up. Only that by the time my fingers reached the nightstand drawer for the key, they were ice cold and numb. The study was at the end of the hall. I pushed the door open gently. It had always been John's private space, his sanctuary. No one entered without his invitation. But Sophie had been in and out as if the room were hers, never once hesitating at the door. That was when it first occurred to me, maybe John had given her permission. Maybe in the end he'd allowed far more than I ever knew. His scent still lingered inside, cedarwood from the shelves, the ink of his old-fashioned ballpoint pens, and the faint trace of mint gum he always kept in the right-hand drawer. I crouched down and slid the key into the lock of the deep gray safe under his desk. The metal gave a dull click and my heart stuttered. I lifted the lid. The first thing I saw was a thick manila envelope, sealed and labeled in his handwriting. For Michelle, if you ever need the truth. I didn't open it. Not right away. Instead, I carefully removed each item from the safe. Several financial documents, a medical report, a stack of photographs, and 2 folded pages that looked like printouts of an email or letter. I picked up the medical report first. It was from a fertility clinic in San Francisco, dated 3 years ago. The results: severely low sperm motility. Chances of conception, near zero. I read it 3 times before the words truly sank in. If he knew back then that he couldn't father a child, then Sophie's baby? My hands trembled as I reached for the next document. A paternity test. Issued by a private lab. Samples identified as fetal amniotic fluid and John Walker. Result: no biological relationship. It hit me like a sledgehammer. I staggered back against the desk, nearly losing my balance. But it wasn't over. The photos came next. Taken by a private investigator. Sophie wearing a low-cut sweater, leaning into a man's shoulder. The 2 of them standing beside the company parking lot, unmistakably close. A few shots even showed them entering a motel hand in hand. The man wasn't John. It was Rick, John's operations manager. I remembered John once mentioning half-jokingly, "Rick's been late a lot lately. I've got a hunch he's messing around with someone new in the office, but I can't prove it." I'd laughed it off at the time. And now that throwaway comment had become a clue. The next page was a summary report from the same PI. Rick Garcia, age 44, married with 2 children. Still employed at Walker Renovations. Suddenly everything fell into place. Sophie had never loved John. She had gotten pregnant by Rick, who couldn't be involved. So she'd found a willing fool. Someone older, kind, already sick. Someone who wouldn't question too much. Someone she could control. She'd chosen John. And John. Maybe he fell for it at first. But eventually he found out. That's when I remembered the envelope. I opened it. Inside was a handwritten letter. John's handwriting, neat and deliberate, full of that same steady clarity he always had. If you're reading this, it means I'm gone. First, I want to say I'm sorry. I should have told you sooner. But I was a coward. I didn't want to burden you. I didn't want Sophie's mess to hurt you, and I didn't want Loretta to force you into a corner. At first, I truly thought Sophie would take the money and disappear. She promised. But she stayed. Then I hired someone to look into her. That's when I found out, the baby isn't mine. It's Rick's. I was stunned. But I also knew I didn't have time. I didn't want you tangled up in the drama, and I sure as hell didn't want my mother hurting you over a child that wasn't even mine. So I stayed quiet. My silence was my way of protecting you, even if it meant you'd misunderstand me. If you decide to act on any of this, please be careful. You've always been the person I trusted most. I've always loved you. That's never changed. John. My throat burned, but I didn't cry. There was only one thought in my mind. I would not stay silent. No matter how flawless Sophie's performance was, it couldn't hide the truth anymore. She thought this house belonged to her now. That a single lie could steal my marriage, my home, even my dignity. But now it was time for her to see. I wasn't the kind of widow she could manipulate. I didn't sleep that night. The letter and the pile of evidence lay sprawled in front of me, untouched. I sat in John's old study under the dim yellow light, the wind outside curling moonlight across the windows. The letter trembled softly, like his voice still whispered through the room. 2 cups of black coffee later, my thoughts were razor sharp. I knew this moment had to come. And it couldn't wait any longer. Sophie had basked in her little triumph long enough. Loretta had been strung along like a puppet. And I had tolerated enough. The next evening I invited them to dinner. Loretta blinked, clearly caught off guard. You cooked. I think it's time we had a talk, I said softly, sliding the lasagna into the oven. My voice was calm, eerily so, like I was commenting on the weather. Sophie came down the stairs in a flowy maternity dress, looking effortlessly put together. Her makeup was flawless, her hair curled just enough at the ends to look casual. She played the part of this sweet girl just trying to keep the peace to perfection. I set the table for 3. Everything looked warm, quiet, almost like a family gathering. What they didn't know was that in the drawer beneath the table a folder was waiting. Once the lasagna was served, the oven turned off and we were all seated. I broke the silence. Thank you both for joining me tonight, I said. But this isn't really about dinner. Sophie looked at me, smiling. I'm glad you're finally ready to talk. I've been hoping we could connect. Her tone carried that graceful, self-assured air, like the winner politely offering peace. I didn't respond. Instead, I reached down, opened the drawer and placed the manila folder on the table. The air snapped still. Loretta frowned. What's that? It's what John left me, I said evenly. I opened the folder and laid the documents out one by one, like playing a hand of poker face up. The first was a fertility report. This is from 3 years ago. John had a full workup in San Francisco. After that, he knew he could never father a child. Loretta picked it up, scanning the words. Her hands shook. The second was the paternity test. This is the report John left behind. The fetus isn't his. Sophie paled. Her lips parted slightly as if the air had left her lungs. Then came the photos. Sophie, arms around Rick. Her slipping into a motel with him. Clothes. Familiar. This is you and Rick, I said. My voice was low but clear. John found out. He just didn't want me tangled in it. And he didn't want Loretta shattered after he was gone. Loretta looked up, her face crumpling in confusion and disbelief. Rick? From the company? But he's married, isn't he? Yes. The grandson you thought you were waiting for? He's not your son's child. My eyes locked onto hers. He belongs to your son's manager. Sophie finally broke. She stood, her voice brittle. I didn't know John had those tests done. I didn't lie. I really thought it was his, at first. Cut it out, I said. You knew exactly what you were doing. You got pregnant and needed someone desperate, dying, and rich enough to be your out. She froze, her lips trembling. Loretta turned toward her, her voice hollow. Is it true? The baby, it's not John's. Sophie opened her mouth. Nothing came out. I answered for her. It's Rick's. You said it yourself. Loud and clear. The photos confirm everything. Loretta sank back in her chair, her voice barely audible. No, she told me she loved John. She loved what John had. Sophie dropped to her knees, clutching at Loretta's legs. I didn't mean to lie, I was scared. Rick won't help me, he has a family and I can't raise a baby alone. Loretta pulled her hands away. Why didn't you just tell the truth? I was afraid. I swear I was going to leave, but John begged me to stay. He said he'd give me money, help me leave with dignity. Did you leave? I said coldly. You took the money. Then you came to the funeral, moved into my house, took over my kitchen and tried to name your child after my husband. Did you leave? She was silent for a long beat. Then finally she lowered her head and whispered, I'm sorry. I watched her cry. I felt nothing. Her tears meant nothing now. Loretta slowly rose from her chair and walked over to me. Her voice was gravelly. I didn't know. I said nothing to her. My eyes stayed on Sophie. You need to be gone by morning. Sophie looked up, panic flashing across her face. I can leave now, tonight, please don't call the cops. Please don't tell Rick's wife. You should be more worried about your next move, I said, a bitter smile tugging at my mouth. Because I'm done playing nice. I stood, picking up John's letter from the end of the table. I looked at them both. This house, John left it to me. And now I'm taking it back. Sophie didn't leave. The next morning I came downstairs to find her sitting on the living room couch. She wore a baggy sweater, her face pale, dark circles under her eyes, but she didn't look rattled. Calmly scrolling on her phone, she looked up when she noticed me. "Michelle," she said evenly, rising to her feet. "I just need some time to make arrangements. You can't throw me out with nowhere to go." I said nothing. Just turned and walked into the kitchen, shutting the door behind me. I thought maybe, just maybe, she'd finally accepted defeat. I was wrong. That afternoon, I got a call from the front desk at John's company. "Mrs. Walker, we had a visitor today claiming to be Mr. Walker's fiancée. She said she's carrying his child and has a legal right to access inheritance and financial records. She also mentioned she's living in your home, so we weren't sure if she had your authorization." "She doesn't," I cut in, my voice cold. "She has no authority. No rights. Do not let her near company files again, no matter what she claims." "Understood." I hung up and immediately called Jeff, our family attorney, someone John had worked with for years. He'd handled our estate planning, our trust, even our prenup. He listened carefully, then said, "You need to file a protective inheritance claim. Document your legal stake in John's personal estate. Otherwise, she might attempt to intervene as the unborn child's guardian. She's not carrying John's child." My voice was tight. "Then we need documented proof," Jeff said. "Do you have it? Reports, photos, anything that can hold up in court?" "I do." I clenched my jaw. "I have everything." "Then it's time to move. If she won't walk away, we'll make sure she has no ground to stand on." I ended the call and began gathering everything from the safe, paternity test, private investigation photos, financials, and started making copies. By the time I left the copy shop, night had fallen. When I stepped back into the house, the air felt different, tense still. Loretta was seated at the dining table, hands folded, face troubled. She looked up slowly. "Sophie told me you're making her leave." I said nothing. "She says you may have misunderstood. He's pregnant, Michelle. She has nowhere to go, no job, no income." I took off my scarf and answered calmly, "She's not just trying to stay. She's trying to inherit John's company." Loretta's eyes flickered. "She only said she was willing to carry on John's legacy. You know how much he loved that company." "He loved integrity more," I snapped. "Do you even know what she's done?" Loretta didn't respond. I could see the conflict in her face. She wasn't ready to hear the truth. I walked over and placed a copy of Sophie's application, where she had listed herself as John's unmarried widow, right in front of her. "She's not looking for shelter. She's looking for leverage." I locked eyes with her. "Do you remember what John wrote? If someone ever hurts you, don't stay silent like I did. He left this mess to me. Now it's my turn to clean it up." Loretta lowered her gaze. She didn't defend Sophie. But she didn't defend me either. The next morning, Jeff accompanied me to John's company. In the executive conference room, we submitted all documentation: Sophie's false claims, the paternity report, and the PI's photos. The board took immediate action, freezing her access to all company records, projects, and personnel. Rick was there too. "Is that Rick?" He looked calm. Too calm. In fact, there was a smug little smirk at the corners of his mouth. I turned to him, voice icy. "If you think I don't know what went on between you and Sophie, then you've severely underestimated how prepared John really was." For the first time, something flickered behind his eyes. Panic, then quickly masked with a sneer. "You really are a sharp widow. Then you know I won't let this slide." I handed Jeff a fresh folder. "We've traced the misappropriations. The company's doing a full audit, starting with your department." His face finally changed. No more smirks. While the legal battle picked up speed, Sophie did something I didn't expect. She returned home that night, quietly. No outbursts. No fake tears. He made dinner. She set the table carefully, even folded the napkins with intention. When everything was in place, she sat across from me and looked directly into my eyes. "Michelle," she said, her voice calm and steady. "I'll go. But I want to talk first." I said nothing. She inhaled slowly. "I'll have the baby. And after that, would you consider adopting him? Give him John's last name. Walker." I froze. And she kept going. "Loretta said you're a rational person. You never had children. And this child, even if he isn't biologically John's, he could still be part of your family." She offered a soft smile, as if presenting an olive branch. "You don't have to treat me like an enemy, Michelle. You've won. But you don't have to sit in this big empty house alone. You could have a child. One who listens to you, belongs to you. One you can mold. I stared at her, saying nothing, the silence stretching long and sharp. Even in the face of defeat, she was trying to carve out a new role. She wasn't retreating, she was repositioning. Trying to become indispensable. Trying to be needed. You really think that's what I want? I said at last, voice flat. She said nothing. Just lowered her gaze. I picked up my plate, walked to the sink and dumped the soup down the drain. Then I turned and walked upstairs without another word. That night, I sat down and began drafting a formal witness statement outlining Sophie and Rick's coordinated fraud. I was ready to file for criminal investigation. Because now I understood something clearly. Some people, if you don't break them down completely, they will never leave on their own. It was still dark when I stood outside the glass doors of Jeff's law office, a manila folder clutched tightly in my hands. The building was silent, the desk lamps inside still off, but the weight in my chest had already begun to settle like stone. Jeff arrived earlier than I expected, coat collar turned up against the morning chill. His eyes landed on the file in my hands and he gave a quiet nod. It's starting, huh? It's time, I said. A few days later, the first emergency board meeting was called inside the smaller conference room at John's company headquarters. Everyone was there, John's longtime partners, project directors, and a few senior employees who'd been with the company since the beginning. Familiar faces, all of them, but today there was tension in the air that hadn't been there before. Jeff stood, the evidence I'd provided spread neatly before him. We have reason to believe there has been unethical collusion between Sophie Brown and Rick Garcia, the company's current finance manager, he began clearly. As the lawful spouse of the late John Walker and executor of his estate, Michelle Walker is petitioning for a formal internal investigation. Heather, the assistant controller, immediately chimed in. There've been multiple irregularities over the past 2 months. Charges marked as employee wellness allowances, vendor consulting fees, and even temporary settlements. None of them were approved through standard general ledger channels. I sat silently in the corner, eyes fixed on Rick. He sat across the table, hands clasped tightly, his expression unreadable, but the twitch in his jaw betrayed him. Jeff laid more papers out across the table. We also obtained internal emails from Sophie Brown, in which she identified herself, without any official designation, as John Walker's chosen successor. She then attempted to access project financials and forecasted earnings. One of the senior project managers raised an eyebrow. Her role? She was a temporary intern, Jeff replied smoothly. Not a shareholder. And given the DNA report confirming the fetus is not biologically related to John Walker, she has no legal grounds to claim any inheritance rights. Silence settled like ash. Then Rick finally spoke, his voice sharp and bitter. You're going to destroy my entire career over a couple of photographs and some expense reports? He gave a short, cold laugh. John trusted me. He approved most of these expenses. I stood slowly. John trusted you because he never imagined you'd conspire with someone who deceived him, I said, my voice quiet but firm. But he was suspicious. He started digging before he passed. I slid a photo across the table. Rick and Sophie, leaning into each other just outside John's office. The timestamp made it undeniable. It was taken 10 days before John was hospitalized. You told her about John's condition that day, I said. You helped her accelerate her plan. Rick's chair screeched backward as he stood, his mask cracking. You want to charge me? Fine. Let's take this to court. Gladly, Jeff said, snapping the folder shut. Criminal proceedings will be filed this week. The district attorney's office will receive a full report. Rick muttered a curse and stormed out, slamming the door behind him. And for the first time since my world shattered, I felt something stir in my chest. A small but unmistakable taste of victory. Later that day, just as I was walking toward my car, my phone rang. Loretta. You're really taking her to court? She asked, her voice wavering. She defrauded this family and stole from John's company, I said flatly. There was a pause. Then she asked, more softly, but that baby, do you really want him born into a court battle? I stared straight ahead. I'm not stopping any child from being born. But I will stop his mother from using him to squeeze out what's left of our family's dignity. Loretta said nothing for a long moment. Then she whispered, "I didn't know she was like that." "She fooled me." "She's always been like that," I replied. "You just couldn't see it." I hung up and climbed into the driver's seat. In the reflection of the windshield, I no longer saw the dazed, grieving widow who'd sat quietly at John's funeral. That afternoon, I convened a smaller meeting in the conference room. Just me, the administrative manager, the project director, and one of John's oldest business partners. Together, we signed a formal declaration. I would assume full oversight of the company's financial activities during the estate transition period. Rick's access to all pending bids and vendor payments would be suspended indefinitely. Later that evening, Heather found me alone in the hallway and lowered her voice. "You know, Sophie tried to request access to John's private email a few weeks ago? She told IT it was for estate management." I let out a bitter laugh. "She really does know how to exploit the dead, doesn't she?" Heather studied me carefully. "Are you really going to take her all the way to court?" "I have to," I said without hesitation. "She's not some lost girl who made a mistake. She's a professional predator." That night I returned to an empty house. I scrubbed the kitchen counter until it gleamed. Trimmed every flower arrangement in the living room by half an inch. Sophie wasn't home. She was probably hiding at some friend's place, regrouping. But I knew she wasn't gone. She'd come back. She'd fight. And I was ready. Sophie finally made her move. She dropped the act. No more tears, no more sweet politeness. Instead, she hired a high-profile family attorney and filed a countersuit at the county courthouse, accusing me of malicious eviction and willfully infringing on the inheritance rights of an unborn child. When Jeff laid the documents in front of me, his expression wasn't surprise. It was a cool, practiced weariness. "I figured she'd do this," I said, running my fingers over the bolded title on the filing. "She just moved faster than I expected." Jeff sighed. "She's playing the sympathy card. Pregnant woman framed as the underdog against a wealthy widow. It's a narrative the media loves. If this goes public, it could look like a rich woman bullying a defenseless mother-to-be." I nodded, my gaze unwavering. "Good thing we don't win cases with feelings. Then let's make this clean." A few days later, the preliminary hearing was held. Sophie sat across the aisle, flanked by her legal team, one hand supporting her back, the other resting delicately on her swollen belly. She wore a soft gray-blue cashmere coat and the expression of a woman forced to fight for her unborn child's future. Her lawyer opened with exactly what we expected. "My client is 7 months pregnant. Her health is fragile, but she is here today to protect the rights of the child she's carrying. This is more than a property dispute. This is about the fundamental rights of a new life." I remained silent. Jeff stood, setting a thick packet of documents before the court. "We submit the following as preliminary evidence. First, a medical report from 3 years ago confirming John Walker's infertility. Second, a paternity test based on amniotic fluid samples proving the fetus is not genetically related to the deceased. Third, surveillance photographs taken by a licensed investigator showing Sophie Brown in a romantic relationship with the company's CFO, Rick Garcia. And fourth, a signed letter from the deceased stating he was aware of the situation and instructing his wife to use the enclosed evidence to protect his legacy, should it become necessary." Jeff paused, letting the words hang heavy in the courtroom. "We also intend to submit additional records, including witness testimony and financial discrepancies, to prove that Ms. Brown attempted to gain access to company accounts through fraudulent claims of inheritance." Sophie's face drained of color. Her attorney scrambled to recover. "Your Honor, we question the admissibility of this evidence, particularly the surveillance photos. The invasion of privacy must be evaluated through digital forensic review." The judge, a stern woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense tone, raised a hand. She picked up John's letter, brow furrowed, and read it in silence for nearly 2 full minutes. Then she looked at Sophie. "Ms. Brown, were you aware that John Walker suffered from infertility?" Sophie hesitated. I didn't know for sure." "Were you aware that the child you're carrying may not be biologically his?" Another pause. I had doubts." The courtroom went still. Behind me, Loretta sat in the gallery, clutching the corner of her scarf so tightly it crumpled like paper. The hearing continued. Jeff submitted printouts of email exchanges between Sophie and Rick. Lines like, "John won't question it," And the company won't dig too deep, painted a damning picture. Sophie tried to refute them, but it was her email account. Her words. Her lawyer pushed forward, clearly desperate to steer the case. Your Honor, the central issue remains the unborn child's right to security, not past romantic entanglements. Jeff gave a soft, pointed laugh. The only thing growing inside her is a scam. The judge closed the folder with finality. This concludes the preliminary hearing. A ruling will be issued within 10 days. If the plaintiff's claims are not substantiated with new evidence, the countersuit will proceed. Effective immediately, Sophie Brown is prohibited from interfering with Walker Enterprises or its estate proceedings in any capacity. I rose and nodded toward the judge. As I turned, I locked eyes with Sophie. There were no more tears in hers. No pleading. Only raw hatred and humiliation. That afternoon, I returned home to find Loretta sitting on the living room couch. No TV on. Her beloved recipe book untouched beside her. I took my coat off and sat across from her. Her voice was hoarse when she finally spoke. I was a fool. I waited. I actually believed she wanted to keep the baby for the sake of the family name, she said quietly. Did you know she came to me before the hearing? Told me she'd walk away from the inheritance if I gave her 50 grand. My eyebrows lifted. Did you? She shook her head. Not that stupid. But I hesitated. For a moment I did consider it. He paused, eyes downcast. John died so suddenly. I panicked. I clung to the first person who promised to stay. I didn't see who she really was. But now I do. I nodded. John may be gone. But what he built still stands. And it's worth protecting. Loretta finally looked up. This time, I'm with you. I didn't answer, but I felt something shift. That night, Jeff sent a message. Judge approved discovery of all financial transfers between Sophie and Rick. I sat under the warm lamplight and unfolded John's letter once again, my fingers tracing the words. If someone hurts you, don't stay silent like I did. I nodded toward the quiet, empty house. Don't worry, John. I didn't. The court's ruling came faster than any of us expected. Every one of Sophie's accusations was thrown out. In a swift reversal, it was our civil suit against her and Rick that was formally accepted. The company's legal team moved quickly to freeze all accounts under Rick's name, and within 48 hours Sophie's lawyer publicly withdrew from her case. The news spread like wildfire. Her lies, her greed, her carefully crafted persona, all of it came crashing down like brittle leaves in late fall, stripped away by wind and exposed for what they were, hollow and rotted. I never saw Sophie again. Some said she moved out of state, barely getting by with Rick's secret financial support. Others whispered that she gave birth quietly and left the father's name blank on the certificate. I never bothered to find out which version was true. Some people, once you've seen what's behind the mask, aren't worth looking at again. As for Loretta, 3 days after the hearing, she collapsed in the bathroom. The call from the hospital came while I was reviewing year-end budgets at the office. The moment I heard her name, I dropped my pen and ran. The doctor said it was a mild cerebral incident triggered by high blood pressure and emotional stress. She would need to stay for observation. Her body was aging and the strain of the past few weeks had been too much. I sat by her hospital bed, watching this woman who had once been fierce, immovable, now lying quietly, her skin ashen, the corners of her eyes marked by faint, dried tears. When she finally opened her eyes, her voice cracked. Did I ruin everything? I didn't answer. I simply reached out and pulled the blanket higher over her shoulders. She stared at the ceiling, then spoke again, softer this time. When I was younger, I believed as long as blood carried on, nothing truly ended. But now I know. The greatest mistake in life is putting your faith in the wrong person and destroying the right one. Her words didn't anger me. I had hated her once. But now her regret felt genuine. Like a window finally cracked open after years of stale silence. I realized then, some reconciliations aren't about forgiving them. They're about freeing yourself. Loretta later moved into an assisted living center. She said she needed distance. Space to think about what she'd lost and what had been real. I didn't stop her. Back at the old house, things were quiet again. Sophie's clothes no longer hung over the sofa. The kitchen mugs had been swapped back to my own favorites. I moved John's photo from his study to the upstairs bedroom, placing it by the window. Some mornings when sunlight streamed through the glass, it would hit the frame just right, and in those soft golden hours I swore I could almost hear his voice. "I know you'll handle it." Thought I might cry. But I didn't. I just looked at his picture and whispered, "I used to think this house was our fortress." But it turned into an echo chamber I was left alone to guard. So, I think it's time to go. That weekend I called a realtor and put the house on the market. Within a month, a young couple bought it. They looked happy, hopeful. I stood in the center of the now empty living room on closing day, taking one last look at the photo wall, the bookshelves, the curtains. Memories flowed through me like a quiet stream. But they no longer stung. This place was a chapter in my story. But it didn't have to be the ending. With the proceeds, I bought a small cottage in the neighboring town. Single story, front yard lined with hedges, a winding path leading to a backyard garden. I also opened a flower shop. It was modest, tucked on the corner of Main and Oak, beneath two cherry blossom trees that scattered petals in the wind. I taped the name on the glass door myself. Second Bloom. Customers were few, but every bouquet was crafted by hand. Before each one left my hands, I'd ask, "Who's this one for today?" And I always added, "For yourself" is a perfectly good answer. I liked that life. No games. No power plays. Just early mornings at the flower market, afternoons wrapping a boy's first Valentine's bouquet, and evenings in the garden with irises and lilacs swaying in the light. I stepped back from the company. Transferred operational control to the partners. I only reviewed annual reports at year-end, just enough to keep a connection without being pulled back in. Loretta sent postcards now and then. She said the sun hit the porch of her facility just right every afternoon. She was painting again. Reading through John's childhood journals. I wrote back sometimes, told her what I'd planted that week, how the neighbor's cat had made my window display his napping spot, and how come April the cherry blossoms never failed to bloom. Sometimes real victory isn't about defeating someone. Simply about finally being able to live, quietly, fully, and on your own terms. The days passed quietly one by one. My flower shop slowly found its rhythm and the town began to remember me, not as that rich widow or the ex-daughter-in-law of the Walkers, but simply as Michelle the florist. Or more affectionately, the woman who runs Second Bloom. I liked that. The name wasn't loud or dramatic. It spoke of starting over but without fanfare, like a whisper of strength in spring. One early morning I opened the shop as usual, preparing to set out the fresh roses and lisianthus that had just arrived. That's when I noticed an envelope slipped beneath the door. No name, no return address. I thought it was another ad. I opened it casually but the first line stopped me cold. "I don't know if you remember me." The paper was slightly worn, the handwriting careful yet tentative. It was a letter from Rick's wife. She wrote, "The evidence you presented in court changed my life. I should have known. I did know in the quiet places of my mind, but I kept lying to myself. I kept enduring it. For our kids. For the sake of appearances. But that day I finally had a reason to stop pretending. I took the kids and moved back to the town where my parents live. I'm working again. I'm breathing again. And if it weren't for you I might still be stuck in that swamp. So, thank you." At the bottom she added, "You probably don't realize it but your courage changed more than just your own life." I folded the letter slowly, my eyes stinging. I'd never imagined that, somewhere beyond the storm in some unseen corner of this mess, there was another woman, also quietly wrestling with her fate. And somehow I'd become her turning point. That evening I sat in the backyard watching the roses sway gently in the breeze. For the first time in a long time I felt something that wasn't relief or survival. It was peace. I finally understood. Starting over doesn't mean going back. It means choosing to go forward. The next afternoon, a man in a khaki trench coat walked into the shop. Late 30s, maybe early 40s. A little rushed but kind-eyed. He said he was a high school English teacher from the local district, and he had just proposed to his girlfriend. He was looking for something special to mark what he called their moment of decision. "She's been through a rough marriage," he said softly, "but she's still willing to try again. I want to give her something that says, freedom and choice." I smiled and wrapped him a bouquet. Sunflowers for hope and conviction, irises for dignity and rebirth. When he took the flowers he glanced at the letters on the shop window and tilted his head. "This name, It's interesting. What's it called? I looked at him and smiled gently. It's called Michelle's second bloom. He nodded like he understood. Like he was offering a silent kind of blessing. After he left, I stood at the doorway watching the sun spill across the brick wall across the street and the cherry tree beside me just starting to bud. As I thought, the name fits. I had once fallen hard, dragged down by lies, cornered by judgment, betrayed by people I trusted most. But I climbed out. No one reached down to save me. I did it myself, one painful step at a time. This flower shop isn't just a restart. It's a monument to everything I survived. It's the message I leave behind for the world. Life can bloom again, even if the first season withered.
And that wraps up today's story. Now we want to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments, and let's see how far these stories reach. If this story moved you or gave you chills, give it a like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories. One last thing, rate the story from 1 to 10 in the comments. Your feedback helps us bring you even better ones next time. Thanks for watching. We appreciate you being part of this storytelling journey.